So today we're going to talk about acing the interview and specifically how to prepare for a virtual interview and some tips and tricks along the way.
So in order to prepare for any interview, you should research the organization and the job description. Know what you're applying for and what the position will entail. You want to make sure that you define your goals, that you know your strengths, weaknesses, and skills. You determine success stories and examples. It's always good to have some examples prepared so that when you're responding to a question, you can back it up with an example. And you can always review sample questions that are in our interviewing skills handbook.
Okay, and then remember to relax and be yourself and be honest during an interview always. You're going to want to be a great listener, and we will touch on this a little bit more when it comes to virtual interviewing. You want to take time to think about your answers before you give them. So don't feel like you have to just blast out an answer first. You can take a second. You can ask for clarification if needed. Always, feel like you can ask somebody to repeat the question, or if you need clarification, that's totally okay. And use a strong voice. So you're going to want to project and have a confidence within your voice. Again, do not say anything negative about your past employers. This is something that, just we always like to mention. And then do not inquire about salary, benefits, or vacation during that initial interview.
So some virtual tips. Before your interview, maybe a day before, test your technology. Make sure you have the most recent version of whatever platform you're going to be using. You probably should also test your microphone and your audio. You want to be prepared. So you have everything at your desk or table, wherever you're sitting, your resume, a notepad, if that's what you've written some examples on, or you have questions. It should all be at your table so you're not getting up and down during the interview. Make sure you have a professional background. And by that, we mean an uncluttered background. So if you can sit up against a plain wall, that's probably the best kind of background to have. As far as eye contact, it's a little different. You want to make sure you're looking at the camera and be a great listener. And so with this virtual realm that we're in right now, you want to make sure you're not talking over someone else and you're really listening to the question that is being asked so that you can respond to it fully.
Right. And then just one more tip that we like to talk about is if you have some specific things you want to mention during the interview, go ahead and have like a post-it note around your computer, and that'll help you remember to mention certain things. If you had a couple bullet points, then you're not, shuffling through papers or looking frantically for any kind of information. And then now we'll talk about professional dress. A lot of times you see people, if they're on a virtual call, they say, oh, I just have to be dressed from the top up and that's it. I really encourage students and anybody really to dress professionally, have your full outfit. It helps you feel more confident, and it really helps sets the stage of a professional environment when interviewing. So always, have your have professional dress, professional your shoes. You don't necessarily, nobody's going to see your shoes in this, but again, for the full ensemble look and to feel really professional and really help you put yourself in that interview mode, we would encourage you to do that. So a little bit about professional dress there.
And it really does make a difference when you are dressed fully. It does make you feel more confident. So here, we talk about handshakes. Well, in the virtual world, you're not going to be able to do a handshake. So what we really encourage you to do is focus on your professional introduction. So what are you going to tell them about yourself that's not too long that will introduce you to them?
Okay, and these are some top questions that employers generally ask a majority of the time. That tell me about yourself, the why are you interested in this position, why should we hire you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? These are all very general questions. And in our interview handbook, we have a lot of general interview questions that you can practice. And then we also have some behavioral interview questions that we will talk more about in just a second. Um, but these are the very first one I can say a little bit about, the tell me about yourself. A lot of times people are very concerned about, well, how much do I say, how much do they want to know? It's very much I like to call it more of a summary about yourself. So you're going to give all the information, tell them who you are, maybe a little bit of background with your education, with your professional experience, any kind of community involvement things that you're doing. But also it leaves room to where you can touch on all these topics, but then expand on during the interview. Deb, did you want to add anything to that?
No, that's really good, because you you don't want to go on a really long time. And with students, we find sometimes when we ask about tell me about yourself, they try and give all their information at one time, and you have to leave something for the interviewer to ask you. Let's see. And then, why are you interested in our organization? Make sure you've done your research. And if there's something that resonates with you, maybe it's a value that they have that resonates you want to talk about that. You want to talk about why you're interested in them.
Right. And that really goes back to you being prepared for that interview, and it'll very much show during a virtual interview.
Exactly. All right. So strengths and weaknesses. Um, they probably will ask the strengths and weakness question. So when they ask you about, what are your strengths, you probably want to have 2 or 3 strengths already thought out about what are your strengths, and then examples that back up your strengths. So if you say you're really organized, or you're a very organized person, you want to have an example of how you're organized. Do you keep a day planner? Do you write to-do lists every day? Do you check things off as you're going through your list? And Bailey is a very organized person. And then you want to have one weakness, and you want to talk about how you are working on it. So, if you don't like speaking in front of people, how could you work on that? Well, you could take take a public speaking class, or if an opportunity arises for you to do some public speaking, you can volunteer to do that. So the more you do it, the stronger you'll become with it. And it's just taking that initiative to try and get outside of your comfort zone.
And then now we'll talk about the STAR method. This is a method that a lot of employers use, and how I mentioned behavioral questions earlier. These are questions that assess your behavior. So exactly what it sounds like. And this is kind of a tool to help you answer those questions. So if you've been asked ever, tell me about a time when, where they're prompting you to give an example or describe a situation, the STAR method is something that you want to use. So it stands for situation, task, action, and result. And I don't want anybody to get nervous about this, because this is generally how we storytell and conversate anyway. But you want to give the situation. Let them describe the situation, give context, because the employer obviously doesn't know. So you're setting the stage for them. And then you're going to want to talk about the task. What goal were you working towards? What needed to be accomplished? And then the action, describe the actions you took to address the situation, and ultimately the result. Describe the outcome and what happened.
So in the interview skills handbook, this is laid out for you as well. So you'll be able to write down your answers to some behavioral interviewing questions in order to prepare yourself. And so here are some examples of STAR questions. What is your typical way of dealing with conflict? Give me an example of a time when you motivated others. Tell me about a difficult decision you've made in the past year, and tell me about a time when you delegated a project effectively. And the theory behind these interview or behavioral interview questions is that, like Bailey said, how you have behaved in a situation previously is a pretty good indicator of how you will behave in a similar situation in the future.
And we encourage you to have a few examples on hand. A lot of times students panic and they think they have to have an answer or, excuse me, an example for each one. But a lot of times you'll find that some of your examples can fit in a lot of these different questions.
Absolutely. And employers do utilize this method a lot. Some employers only ask behavioral interviewing questions. So you really have to get feeling comfortable with responding to these questions.
Okay, and now we have, this is just an example of some illegal interview questions versus legal interview questions. So I'm going to go through just a couple here. When it comes to age, they are not allowed to ask you how old you are. So nobody should ever be able to do that. But what they can do is say, do you meet the minimum age requirement set by the law? So if you, for example, are selling alcohol or anything like that, you must be a certain age. So making sure that that is, when that's applicable, they can do that. And let's see. So when it comes to citizenship, they are not allowed to ask that specifically, but they can say, are you authorized to work in the United States? And you will find that on a lot of applications that is said there. When it comes to race, that is never an appropriate question in an interview to talk about or ask. Religion, people may, the way they can do this is say they can inquire about religious accommodations once you are hired. So that would be the only way that that would be appropriate. When it comes to marital or family status, never appropriate to ask any of that. Let's see, when it comes to any disabilities, they're also not able to ask that, but they can say, can you perform the essential job functions, and can you demonstrate? So they can ask questions like that. And then it's also a great way if you needed any accommodations to also ask them as well once you're hired on. Nobody can ask about an arrest record, but you will see on applications, have you ever been convicted of blank? And then military, a lot of times they may ask it because you may mention that on your resume, and they are totally allowed to talk about it if it's on your resume, but definitely not okay to ask, you know, were you honorably discharged, things like that. So whatever is on your resume, they can't ask you what branch did you serve in, etc. But nothing along the side of the illegal interview questions are not appropriate. So just to give you some background.
Okay, so
Deb, we have a question in the chat.
Oh, go ahead.
Let's see here.
I can't see it. I'm glad you said something.
In regards to illegal interview questions, what would be an appropriate response? May I ask why you are inquiring, or respectfully, I'm not comfortable responding? Yes, Deb, did you want to take this one? You give a really fantastic.
So if they ask you an illegal question, you can say something like, well, I appreciate you asking that. I don't know, you don't necessarily have to say, I don't know how it's related to job, but you can say, I appreciate you asking that. But I feel that I am very qualified to do all of the duties of this position. So you can deflect it every time if they ask you an illegal question. Did that help?
Yeah, and more or less, you'll find that the employer will not push. They may actually go, oh dear, I didn't mean to ask something like that. Or, you know, you'll see that a lot of times they will go, oh, okay, you know, and kind of just back out of that question as well.
And sometimes if they're not in an HR role, but they're interviewing for HR, they may not know what illegal questions are. So If you know what they are, then you can deflect the question similar to how I responded. Is that helpful?
And this is also, yes, thank you, they said. And then,
Okay.
What was I going to say? This is also a great way for you to determine, is this somewhere you want to work? If somebody asks you a million of these, illegal interview questions, it might not be a place of work that you want to work in. So it's also it's red flags. Perfect. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's a really good point, Bailey, because when you are interviewing for a position, you're also interviewing them to find out if it's a good fit for you. So that's a really good point, Bailey. Okay. So you should be prepared to ask questions at the end of the interview. Ask questions about the job or the company that are not on the website or part of the job description. So again, it's just doing your research. Some examples are, can you describe the challenges a person in this job would encounter? And another one is, how do you describe the company culture? The one I like to ask when I'm in an interview is, a year from now, how will you know you've hired the right person for this position? And the reason I like to ask that is they may give you more information about what they're expecting of the person going into the position. And if they say something that you've done but you didn't talk about in your interview, then that's an opportunity for you to say, oh, well, as a matter of fact, I have done A, B, or C, and this is how I did it. So the interview skills handbook is on Inside Pacific under the career tab. I know we have an alum on this call right now, and if you do not have access to the Inside Pacific portal any longer, we can send you the interview skills handbook.
Right, and it's also on Handshake. If you are still able to access Handshake, it's under resources.
That's right, I forgot. Good point.
So we have all these things a bunch of places, but if not, we can always email you.
Okay, Bailey.
Okay, and then always, especially virtually, you want to thank the interviewers for their time and consideration. One thing I didn't mention at the beginning that I wanted to was that employers sometimes virtually, especially, you may be interviewing with a group of people, because that might make it a little easier to interview with multiple people. When they are introducing themselves, I always like to write down everybody's name so that I can send a thank you, a follow-up thank you to everybody that sat in my interview. When you are in person, it's appropriate. You can ask for business cards so that you can message them all. But in this case, definitely writing down their name so that you can look up their email and be able to send that back to them. And when you are writing a thank you note, it doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. You can always thank them for their time. And then if there's anything specifically you talked about, maybe a project that they're working on, you can mention some of those things in there as well. And if you forgot to say something you really wanted to do, that might be a good place to put that again. You can write a thank you letter and or thank you email as well. I do like to say, if you're going to write a thank you letter, sometimes that will get there a lot slower than an email. So do both. Because then they would be able to get that right away. And a lot of times students ask us, why in the world am I writing a thank you? I said thank you. I don't think people really understand how much an employer loves, at the end of the day, doing all those interviews, seeing that thank you come right up to the top of their email inbox. It is just really great. And I will say, Deb Crane still has my thank you note. And so, it's all about that first impression. So I would mention, yes, always do a thank you note.
And honestly, employers like getting the thank you note in the mail as well. And a lot of times they'll keep them and they put it in the file of the person that they interviewed. So these are the career advisors in career services: Bailey, myself, Shannon, and Dan. And we are still, you can call our front desk at 209-946-2361 if you want to set up an appointment. Or you can make an appointment with any one of us through Handshake.
Yeah, and we're very excited because we are doing appointments via phone and via, Zoom and or email. So we offer different options besides in person. All right, and then we wanted to mention our event that we have coming up, and this will be happening the first week of February. It's called Meet Your Future Virtual Mock Interviews. So we have real employers coming that will do mock interviews, so practice interviews with students and alums. So if you wanted to sign up for any kind of you can look at all the employers that are coming and you can sign up to do a mock interview with anybody during a time slot that meets your scheduling. And you can find this on Handshake and you'd be able to see all of that and go ahead and sign up and do this. This is great practice and it gives you great feedback from employers that are actually interviewing. And it's really cool to interview with somebody that you're actually interested in that industry. So if you can, go ahead and peek around and find somebody of interest to you that you'd love to do an interview with. But ultimately, these are all general interview questions that all these employers will be asking. So just trying to help you practice and get those kind of jitters out now before you interview with an actual employer that you are going for a full-time position with.
And this would be a great way to test out your virtual interviewing skills too. It's a little bit different. And then we are going to have a virtual internship and career fair. That's March 18th from 10 to 2. I think if it's similar to our fall career fair, in the morning, employers will have an opportunity to do kind of an information session about their company. And then in the afternoon, you can sign up to have a one-on-one meeting with the recruiter. So if you're interested in that, I don't think the career fair module has been published yet, but we will certainly let you know when it has. And I believe that's the end. Are there questions that any other questions that you all have?
Deb, we have a question here. So speaking hand gestures in virtual interviews, I told my colleagues it seems appropriate and natural. However, I want to double check. What are our thoughts on that?
So with hand gestures, I'm a person that uses my hands a lot. I think it's still okay to have some hand gestures in the virtual interview. You just don't want to get too big. You don't want them too big, so kind of keep them small. I wouldn't be able to talk if I didn't use hand gestures.